as much as Iran's grabbing the attention right now, as much as Gaza grabbed it last year, quite rightly, I think it comes down to the economy as the number one issue. And the American economy is not doing well.
Now, President Trump's decision to launch strikes on Iran, which killed the regime's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, has divided international leaders across the world. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has taken a more cautious approach and not taking a part in the military action. However, shadow opposition leader Kemi Badenoch is calling on the government to use the RAF to strike Iran's missile launch sites. And new YouGov polling has found that 49% of Britons opposed the joint US-Israeli strikes. But how do Americans feel about their president's latest foreign intervention? Joining me to discuss this is Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at the University College Dublin. Thank you for joining me. Are Americans supportive of this new conflict with the Middle East?
A majority are not. The latest poll has 56% of Americans opposing the conflict, and the initial polls were around 59% opposing the conflict. So it's been pretty steady. Around 40 to 42% support the military action. But that's striking for two reasons, Dom. First of all, about 20% of Republicans oppose this conflict. So Donald Trump does not have any unanimous support amongst his supposed base. And secondly, in all my life, whenever an American president's gone to war, Democratic or Republican, at the outset, there's been a rally around the flag effect where you have a vast majority of Americans who support the military operations. That didn't happen this time, despite the fact that Iran, for many Americans, has been sort of, like this country to be feared for decades. So I think, the domestic signs are not good for the Trump folks unless they can get a quick supposed victory over the Iranian regime.
I think it's the trap that every American president always falls into, and they don't appear to read any history books, which is that once you get entrenched in a war, it just never ends well for you. But I think, for Trump is this president that supposed he's not going to start any wars. And then I think he thought he'd invented this new thing, didn't he? A sort of 3-day mini strike war with no boots on the ground. And it just made him look good, a lot of flag waving, and then he could get out. He's in too deep with this one, isn't he?
Yeah, there's no plan B.
There's no plan A, as far as I can see.
Well, the plan A was actually, look, let's kill the supreme leader and indeed dozens of Iranian officials and commanders in that initial strike on Saturday when the Iranians foolishly gathered at the supreme leader's compound. But plan A was supposed to be that the Iranian regime would then just collapse just like that in one of two ways. Either, everybody else in the regime would just give up and run for their lives. That didn't happen. There's still some very capable people. I don't like them, but they're very capable who are there in place. And secondly, the Iranian people, quite a few of whom are my friends because I've worked in Iran, they were not in a position to rise up. They're not able to, even as the bombs are falling, to say, look, we're going to overthrow this regime. And at that point, Trump had drove himself into a bit of a cul-de-sac. Because the wider point you make, Dom, is quite right, that there are two Trumps. There's the one Trump that likes to pose as the president of peace. And I'm old enough to remember, in other words, 2 weeks ago, when he wielded the golden gavel at the Board of Peace meeting in Washington. And the second is he's a guy that likes to kill people and blow up stuff. And I'm really serious about that. So, you had this division that occurred over Venezuela, but they got out of that pretty quickly because they kidnapped the president Maduro and left the rest of the regime in place. They tried to threaten a military invasion of Greenland, but backed off that when it got a bit sticky. This time, you put it quite well. They're in too deep. It's like, Colin Powell, the U.S. Secretary of State a generation ago, when the Americans were thinking about interventions in the Middle East, he warned, you break it, you buy it. Well, the Americans may have broken Iran, but I'm not sure they know what they're buying at this point.
And it's interesting, looking at MAGA, there were signs that there was little splits in MAGA. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene sort of suddenly leaving or being told to leave and going against Trump. But what's happening with MAGA overall regarding this intervention or this war?
In terms of high-profile MAGA, it's widening. Now there are a lot of MAGA folks who are still dug in deep with Trump. You'll see some of them on British television, but there are others who have come out bitterly opposing this conflict. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the representative, she'd already split with Trump, for example, over the Epstein files. Tucker Carlson had already split with Trump over what he sees as the U.S. being too close to Israel. But you had high-profile commentators like Megyn Kelly. And then you talk about those who haven't really taken a position yet. You think about the podcaster Joe Rogan, probably has the biggest listenership in the U.S. And before the actual war, he was saying, he's getting tired of the uncertainty, the nervousness, on a day-to-day basis. He hasn't yet taken a side in terms of the war, but that means there's not like this full-throated support for Trump that you get from some of the most prominent names out there in MAGA land.
What a world we're living in. We're losing the podcasters, Mr. President. Run. But yeah, Rogan, clearly very important, and definitely has seemed to have been slightly turning on him, and that is very interesting. Now, we've got the midterms. What's going to happen there? Millions of voters heading out to the polls in Texas, North Carolina, Arkansas. What do we know? Who is in the running? Texas is particularly interesting.
Yeah, Texas is interesting because on the one hand, the Republicans are trying to put their fingers on the scales of the election through something we used to call gerrymandering. A polite word for it is redistricting, where you pack voters into certain districts so the Republicans get more seats. But they've been losing by-elections in Texas this year by a hefty margin, and so it's not safe. And then you also have some pretty high-profile Democrats who are getting attention. The one who won the primary last week for the U.S. Senate race is a man named James Tallarico.
I love him. I think he's very impressive.
He's very impressive. He beat another high-profile Democrat, Jasmine Crockett, who I also think is quite impressive.
I agree.
But Tallarico is that type of, he devout Christian.
He looks like a Republican.
Yeah, looks like a Republican, but talks like a centrist.
Yeah,
and it very much, I think, is a centrist. And what complicates it, Dom, I don't want to get into the weeds too quick, but on the other side, there are these splits, as you put it, in MAGA land amongst the Republicans. The guy who you think would be opposing him is the incumbent, John Cornyn, who is the number 3 Republican, or was the number 3 Republican in the Senate for years. But there's an attorney general named Ken Paxton, who's running against him, who has been endorsed by Trump. And those two have to go to a runoff. So you don't have a clear Republican to try to hold that seat. But more broadly, Dom, to give the soundbite, as much as Iran's grabbing the attention right now, as much as Gaza grabbed it last year, quite rightly, I think it comes down to the economy as the number one issue. And the American economy is not doing well. Inflation is rising. Growth is only about 1.5%. Last quarter when it was supposed to be 3%. You've got the Trump folks trying to cut health care. They have caused a lot of disruption to government agencies that do provide services to people. If Trump doesn't turn the economy around, I think that will be the key issue. But if he's still stuck in Iran, he'll have even his supporters saying, you're the guy that promised no foreign interventions and you would give us, manna from heaven and gold on the streets. Why isn't it there when you're preoccupied thousands of miles away?
Absolutely. And of course, it'll end up from both ends with higher gas prices, which is one of the big things that he constantly talks about, and will probably doom him. But who knows? He'll probably get out of it as usual. Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics, University College Dublin, thank you very much for joining me there.